This is Authentic Analysis with AI
and K,
where we'll be discussing the most controversial crime cases from across the globe.
as well as other important topics. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe.
We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. Right now we're at 400. I mean, you could share, you could add a comment, do everything you can to help us. We're not trying to, make you out of pocket here. We're just asking you to support what we're trying to do. We're doing research, finding about all these cases. Help us out. Seriously.
And just to say to our friends, I'm really disappointed that you couldn't even freaking do the bare minimum, but cool, innit?
Welcome to Authentic Analysis. Today we've got a different sort of case of a serial killer called Adolfo Constanzo. He was a cult leader,
Drug dealer.
tarot reader.
He just had a whole load of slashes after his name.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
Unfortunately, he had so many victims, and based on the nature of this case, we can't name you all the victims, but one of the main victims was a man named Mark Kilroy.
American 21-year-old.
Yeah, American student from Texas.
Yeah.
A very, very intelligent guy, and unfortunately he lost his life on a trip to Mexico. But before we tell you that story, we have to tell you the life of his serial killer, Adolfo Constanzo.
Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo was born November 1st, 1962, to Delia Aurora Gonzalez, a Cuban immigrant, and she had him when she was 15 years old. She was into a lot of different types of religions. She was into certain types of religions we'll go into. She had been arrested a few times for things like theft, grand theft, forging checks and shoplifting. It's not really much about her, but she kind of shapes and moulds Adolfo's life and what made him be the person that he was. Basically, we're going to talk about the religion that Delia was basically around, she surrounded herself with, and how she brought her son up into those religions.
Adolfo Constanzo's mother was part of a religion called Santeria, which is an Afro-Caribbean religion based on Yoruba traditions. When the slaves were taken from Africa, or West Africa to be specific, to regions like Cuba, but specifically Cuba, they felt like they needed to hide their original African traditions. So what they did was fused it with the European traditions of Christianity, of the slave traders. So it was almost like a code. So Santeria, I'm told, means worship of the saints. So they took the European saints and fused them with their traditions and their gods in order to make a religion. Apparently, when Adolfo Constanzo was 9 years old, she got a palero, which is a priest of the Palo Mayombe religion, to bless her son, because she really believed that he was special. Now, Palo Mayombe is described as a darker version of Santeria, but I think that's a very inaccurate way of describing it. Palo Mayombe is a totally different religion from Santeria. Its origins are from the Congo. Again, in the same vein and the same concept, the African people felt like they had to hide their religion, so they fused it with the European religion, but they were still true to their traditions. But nevertheless, she got a palero, which, like I said, was a priest from the Palo Mayombe religion, to bless her son.
I found this quote that I'm going to read about Palo Mayombe, and basically it says, Palo Mayombe draws no line between black and white magic and allows practitioners to choose a good or bad path without moral judgment, hence its popularity with criminals and drug dealers. So the last bit will reference that later on. So when I first saw that definition, I didn't really understand what it meant. So basically what AI explained that it meant was
that there's no good or bad. You take the practices from the religion and you decide what you want to do. So, for example, if we relate it to Christianity, right? You can pray for positivity. You can pray for the people around you to prosper, to have prosperity and have positive things happen. Or you could pray for bad things to happen. Now, I'm not going to say in Christianity whether that would actually happen, but in this religion, in Christianity, obviously it's all positive, but I'm just making a reference. But in this religion, it doesn't define good or bad. So you can do spells for good and you can do spells for bad, but the religion itself doesn't.
Way to either side.
Yeah. Doesn't, yeah.
I thought so.
We thought it was important to describe the differences between the religions because a lot of people, in this case, obviously a lot of really horrible things happen and we'll never justify all the things that happen. But just because someone's a part of a religion or they claim to be a part of a religion and they do negative things, you can't connect those negative things to that religion, and that's the point.
But that's like
You're trying
with
to
a
make.
lot of religions nowadays, because bad, you get it with, you can get with a certain type of culture or ethnic group or whatever. They might have bad apples, but it doesn't spoil the whole tree.
Absolutely, yeah. So this is no negative reflection on the whole Palomayambe and Santeria culture, and we just thought that we need to define that. But moving on.
Dahlia was married 3 times and she had 3 kids. So her first husband, which was Adolfo's father, he passed away when he was an infant. And then she had remarried again to another man who was Catholic. He didn't have any ties to Santeria or Palo Mayombe. So at this time when she was married to him, she was taking Adolfo back and forth to Puerto Rico. And
Puerto Rico or Haiti, we're not sure.
Okay, yeah, sorry. So, before I do the rest of the video, right now you could type in Adolfo Constanzo's name onto Google and read the first 3 web pages and they will all differ in the countries that he was taken to. So
Absolutely.
Take everything with a pinch of salt, do your own research, but we're just giving you an outline of what our understanding is of what happened.
Yeah.
Dahlia's second husband, that was I referred to earlier, he was Catholic. He had passed away from cancer, I'm not sure exactly when, and supposedly he had left a large sum of money to Dahlia and her 3 kids at the time. So she went on to marry a third man, which was supposedly he was a drug dealer and he was into the similar religion that she was into.
Their religious views are more in line than her previous husband, and here's where we're always honest with you, because obviously these things happened several years ago, so we can't tell you this happened as a fact because we don't know that happened as a fact. We can only tell you the research that we've done. One of the stories is that Adolfo Constanzo was introduced to the religion through his later stepfather. Another story is that he was introduced to Palo Mayombe through a godfather. And it's important to recognize that there's a word called El Padrino, which means the godfather. So when you get high up in Palo Mayombe, you will be called a godfather. So eventually Constanzo himself was called El Padrino, i.e. godfather. So his godfather in the religion could have introduced it to him, or his actual godfather could have introduced it to him. That's all we're trying to say.
Yeah, just to reiterate, Dahlia and Adolfo, once he got a bit older, was doing petty crimes. Dahlia always got off with probation and she never really served any time. And from my knowledge, Adolfo never went to jail for any crimes that he was caught doing. I think he stole a chainsaw from a store. He did a few crimes here or there, but he was never in any serious trouble, so he's pretty much been under the radar for quite a long time.
Adolfo's mother believed that he had psychic abilities. We told you before that she thought that he was special, and she believed apparently that he predicted the assassination of Ronald Reagan in 1981.
The attempted assassination.
Assassination of Ronald Reagan in 1981.
At one point, Adolfo, Dahlia and her 2 sons allegedly had moved back to Puerto Rico, but I know for sure 2 of them had gone back to Puerto Rico. And where they were staying, I think that maybe the area was called Little Havana, where they had been staying, a lot of the neighbours thought she was a witch. So they were quite, a bit on edge with her, or they found her a bit strange. A lot of the places supposedly that they stayed at, Dahlia had left the houses bloodstained, and she had left a lot of remains of the animal sacrifices that she'd done in the homes. Dahlia might have left a headless goat or a headless chicken on her neighbour's doorstep if she felt angered by whoever was around. Constanzo went to live in Mexico City in the 1980s and started to do tarot card readings. He was also picked up on a modelling gig in the 80s also. But as he was doing his tarot card reading, he would do it to the rich and famous people, so drug dealers, I guess famous gangsters, etc. And he was making a lot of money from doing that in that time.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to again reiterate the fact that this Palomayambe stroke Santeria religion is really like popular, if I can use that word, amongst the people. It's like if you go into a certain area and it's fully based on Christians, or you go into a certain area and it's fully based, and then the majority of the people are Muslim. Like in this area where in Mexico City, Santeria and Palomayambe were popular and established religions amongst these people, and that was what he wanted to do. So he was making money from doing blessings and rituals for these gangsters and whatnot.
Animal sacrifices.
And absolutely animal sacrifices as well. And the whole animal sacrifices, just to explain that, is that you give an offering onto the gods. So there will be a pot called an inganga, and you put sticks and animal sacrifices in this pot, and you fuse them together as an offering. So this is what he was doing, and he was charging a certain fee for these things.
So as AI was saying, a lot of the readings, rituals and animal sacrifices that he would do to the gangsters, the drug dealers, he would do these because if the drug dealers or the whatever cartel or gang he was working for at that time period were moving a large shipment, they would come to Adolfo to basically get good luck, to basically have a successful shipment of drugs to wherever they needed to go, to make sure there's no law enforcement interference, to make sure anything goes bad, etc., etc. I'm just going to read a list of what I found online of the prices that Adolfo was charging, which basically led him to being so rich. Supposedly, people were paying up to $4,500 for a single ritual ceremony. Roosters would be for $6 a head. Goats would be for $30 a head. Boas and constrictors at $450. Adult zebras for $1,100, and African lion cubs listed at $3,100. He's doing multiple sacrifices a day. Imagine how much money he's making a day. Times that per week, per month, and he's doing it for a certain amount of years. And he was able to buy himself like a luxury flat, whatever that equivalent is in Mexico City. He was able to buy himself some luxury cars. So, he was making a good amount of money from doing this stuff. And this was just at the beginning of his career.
Yeah. So the bigger the animal, the bigger the sacrifice. And what was interesting about that for me is that, just a little fun fact, I used to go to church quite a lot when I was young, and you got the Cain and Abel story, and you know, I don't. Some of you may know, some of you don't know, but Cain and Abel both gave sacrifices, and one of them gave a sacrifice of animals, and one of them gave a sacrifice of vegetables. So that was interesting for me. But in this case, the bigger the animal, the bigger the offering to the gods, and that was why he was able to make so much money, as Kay said, on the bigger animals.
But even not doing bigger animals, even making $6 a day on cutting off rooster's head, and you know, you can get roosters there, you can make a decent amount of money. But
Yeah.
you know, as he said, the bigger the animal, the bigger the bigger the sacrifice towards the gods, and the more money Adolfo was making.
Yeah.
So with these rituals, he granted a lot of these gangsters invisibility from the police, and I guess because, like AI said, the area that they had come from, they had believed in a lot of ritual practices. So I assume it wasn't hard for Adolfo to say that he could do these certain rituals, and they believed him. I mean, you know, I'm not going to explain why, but to say that you're visible from the police, I mean, Adolfo went from doing animal sacrifices to humans. So allegedly, he raided graveyards and got the human sacrifices from there at first, supposedly. Supposedly he was raiding graveyards and taking it from there.
According to Shango Gumi on YouTube, the spirits of human beings are transferred through their bones. That's the belief of the Palo Mayombe religion. So based on the belief of spirits being transferred through bones, he was taking human beings and putting them into cauldrons and trying to make spells with them. I just need to be clear, this is an abuse of the religion, apparently. So if, for example, they wanted youth, they will get a child, and if they wanted strength, they'll get a strong man. If they wanted, for example, intelligence, they'll get somebody who they knew to be smart.
This was the beginning of Adolfo starting, I guess, getting his cult members together and who he could include and use in his whatever his mastermind plan was. Within the 80s, might be in mid-80s now, he had about 30 well-paying customers that would come to him for rituals and whatnot. Adolfo had recruited at least 4 law enforcement officers. He recruited those officers into his cult, which helped him with his plan to basically fool people into thinking that they were avoiding law enforcement when basically he just had them part of his team. So you had Salvador Garcia, a commander in charge of narcotics. You also had Florentino Ventura, retired from the Federals to lead a Mexican branch of the Interpol. And he had another 2, but the names weren't ever listed.
So we're just trying to show you the extent that this cult stroke gang organization went, and the lines cross, you know. And like I said before, when I was looking into this case originally, I thought, oh my god, it's this evil devil worshipping cult, and I'm not trying to justify their deeds because what they did was wrong. But there are people who worship in the Palo Mayombe and Santeria religions in a positive way. But these people just were gangsters and were trying to transport drugs, and you were using the religion to further their own personal agendas.
When Adolfo might have been blessed by a Palero, I don't know exactly where this phrase came from. It came from the Godfather or whoever, but I'm going to read the quote. So basically it said, "Let the non-believers kill themselves from drugs. We profit from their foolishness." So Adolfo was really against any of his disciples using any form of drugs, which I assume he wasn't using either. So I guess he lived by that terminology, which got him, you know, successful, i.e. don't get high off your own supply.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel it's important to make the definition that at this point in time in his career, he was transporting weed across borders. This was the main substance of his income. I mean, I say the main substance. In terms of drug trafficking, he was moving the weed.
Wait.
Yeah, into the weed. But cocaine was forbidden, heroin was forbidden, which is the point that Kay just made.
Adolfo did a lot of travelling, so as returning from different cities, he had collected his first set of disciples, which was, so he got the federal law enforcement officers, and then he got his cult members, his disciples that were joining. So he had Martin Quintana Rodriguez. Also, he had George Montes, he was a psychic, supposedly also. He had Omar Oria Ochoa, where Omar was obsessed with the occult, or it could have been the religion, from the age of 15. So that was his first set of disciples that helped him, get into what we're going to explain next.
In 1983, Constanzo pledged himself to the Kadiempempe, which is the Palo Mayambe equivalent of the devil. People believed that Constanzo could read the future, and he offered ritual cleansing for those who felt they had been cursed by enemies. He also had 3 of his disciples raid a Mexico graveyard for human bones to start his own enganga, which was what we explained before, a cauldron to create spells. He staged several scams, once posing as a DEA agent, ripping off coke dealers in Guadalajara, and then sold it through his crooked police for $100,000. It's believed that 23 ritual murders are documented, but Mexican authorities say there are unsolved mutilation slayings that may have been committed by the cult.
By this time, Adolfo had become very known and somewhat respected in the religious community. So Florentino Ventura, which was one of his disciples and one of he used to work for the police, or he was currently working for the police, or he was corrupt, one of the two. He had introduced Adolfo to the Calzada family.
Constanzo was really ambitious and wanted to get involved with that crime family. So he made them an offer, and he said to them he would use his spells to protect them for 50% of their profits. To their detriment, they refused, and he got his revenge against them. And several of the Constanzo family's bodies were found
in the Zumpango. Their mutilated remains were found in the Zumpango River.
Yeah.
It was 6 that
6 or 7
that were killed.
Mm.
Adolfo said that all the success that the Calzada family had were basically attributed to his religious rituals, practices.
Yeah.
And when the police had found the remains in the Zumpango River, they said that they went back to the Calzada family's offices, and it was said that they noted there was melted candles, and it was like a sign of a religious ceremony, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it was like a kind of in a sense of like when Jack the Ripper committed his murders, he left a signature, his signature mark. So that's what I'm assuming. Maybe that's what Constanzo did.
Mm-hmm. Fueled with ambition, Adolfo was hell-bent on getting himself into a Mexican crime family. One of the biggest families were the Hernandez family. So he wanted to get involved with that family. Now, one story is that he studied their movements, and he knew that a lady called Zara Aldrete was involved with the Hernandez family. She was dating a man named Gilberto Sosa. So one of the stories is that he followed their movements, and he orchestrated a meeting with her and drove in front of her car, made it seem like an accidental meeting, and started talking to her and developed a friendship with her. Kay's going to tell you the other alternative story that we researched.
So from what I read, maybe it wasn't in depth, but it basically was saying that Adolfo and Sarah met coincidentally. The brothers, the names that I had saw was Elio and Ovidio Hernandez, and their meeting was a coincidence. It didn't from what the reports that I read, it was no plan that Constanzo had came up, so that's why it differs. But either way, he had met the Hernandez brothers, and he had met Sarah around about the same time. But
Yeah. Subsequently, Zara ended up being quite instrumental in the Hernandez and Constanzo family. She was in charge of recruiting new members to their organization, stroke cult.
like AI said, Sarah was dating Gilberto Sosa, which was he was a drugs dealer in Brownsville. And long story short, Constanzo saw what he wanted, which was Sarah. You know, they had an intimate relationship, and Gilberto and Sarah was no more. So that's basically the beginning of Sarah. They refer to her as the El Madrina, which is the godmother. He basically gave her that title, and she was referred to, basically looked at the second in command in the cult.
Adolfo was bisexual. Some say he was gay, but I believe that he was bisexual. He started a relationship with Zara, but then told her that he was more interested in men. But at the time that he told her that, she was invested in a relationship based on the religious aspect. So she sort of settled for the relationship, is the way I understood it. But Adolfo had male partners that were in his organization.
At this time, Constanzo's killing had become very much sadistic, and he was becoming more brutal with his murders. You know, there's no set number of how many people he had actually killed. You know, it's documented that it was about 23 or so, but some believe that it could have been 100. Mexican authorities basically said that there was a lot of mutilated ritual slayings that followed the pattern of what Constanzo did. So at this time, Constanzo decided to move his headquarters to Ranch Santa Elena, which was 20 miles from Matamoros. At the time when Adolfo was moving from, not moving, but he would, you know, go from visit city to city, from Mexico City to Matamoros, etc., he had ordered his disciples to kill a cross-dresser by the name of Ramon, and he asked his disciples to dismember the body also. With Ramon, his parts were basically dumped on a public road, and a lot of his victims that he had chose, which we'll go through, were, I guess, from my understanding, were people that weren't, this is not me saying this, but people that wouldn't be missed. So choosing people like prostitutes, you know, maybe cross-dressers and etc., or maybe drug dealers that could easily be taken out, and, you know, etc., and stuff like that. When Constanzo had asked his disciples to get rid of Ramon's body, Constanzo basically narrowly escaped the police because they had raided one of his homes and found a lot of, what can I call, ritual paraphernalia. And they were close to connect to him to some of the murders that had been happening, but for whatever reason, he was able to continue his killing spree.
Part of their beliefs were that spirits were carried through bones. So Constanzo abused that and took people's bodies. So if he wanted youth, for example, he would sacrifice children. And if he wanted strength, he would, you know, take a strong person and sacrifice their body. So a lot of young people, children, were killed, and there was an occasion where he wanted youth and sacrificed a child, and the child was crying too much, and he thought to himself, no, the gods won't be happy. Still killed the child anyway, but then got another child to sacrifice.
So that was just the, you know, messed up and cruel mind of Adolfo. So, you know, anyone was on the list, young, old, whatever, he did it. So people saw Adolfo as like a god. They would go to him for favours. Whenever they needed something, they would go to him, and Adolfo would perform his sacrifices or his rituals to help out whoever was asking. So Ovidio, who was just introduced to Adolfo, was kidnapped with his 2-year-old nephew by some rival drug dealers. So Ovidio Hernandez, his family decided to go to Adolfo for help. And Adolfo decided, instead of seeking revenge or going after the men, he was going to perform a sacrifice or a ritual to basically using the black magic to get them to come home. And surprisingly enough, 2 days later, Ovidio and the 2-year-old were released from the captures. But the funny thing is, could it have been a setup to make it seem like Adolfo had these magical powers, or was it genuine? But they came out unharmed. So Adolfo Constanzo took credit for the child and Ovidio's safe return, and it made him the hero. Florentino Ventura, which was with him from the beginning, had committed suicide. And I think it was said from others that because Adolfo was building up his rank, in the community, he hadn't even noticed that Florentino had committed suicide at that point.
Another case involved a man named George Gomez, who was sacrificed. When I say sacrificed, I mean murdered, because he was taking drugs, he was taking cocaine, and it was against the rules. Ironically, it was against the rules to take cocaine in their cult or drug organisation, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, he lost his life for that fact.
Well, it's a loss for us, but it's a gain for them. I had spoken about Ovidio Hernandez, which was the brother of Elio Hernandez, and Ovidio was, in close contact with Constanzo, but he hadn't joined the cult until he decided that, he wanted to be a part of this. So they did this through a ritual they called bloodletting. At that same time as Ovidio Hernandez had joined the cult with the ritual bloodletting of his own blood into the Nganga. So Constanzo was always wanting to have victims that he wanted to sacrifice, or even kill them if they were opposition drug dealing family, etc. So at the time, as Ovidio had joined the cult, and Constanzo had sent them out, I guess, on a search party to look for a new victim. I don't know how, because I haven't really explained, but it said at a heat of the moment, Ovidio had chosen his own 14-year-old cousin, which ended up getting murdered by the cult. Gosh. Adolfo had a lot of victims, so there's probably a lot of names that we've missed out, or we haven't, not to say they weren't important or whatnot, but it's it's a lot to include. And some of the victims weren't named, a lot of the dates weren't known, so we're just basically going off the reports that we had seen. Adolfo started growing a hunger and a thirst for more victims, and sending disciples out to kill more people, or any drug families that weren't wanted to team up to go with his plan of I guess being a high ranking drug dealer.
Yeah, so just to clarify, he's doing all these rituals, he's performing rituals for gangsters, he's giving them safety, he's promising them safety, and you have to get yourself in the mindset that they all believed in this religion, they all believed that these spells would work. They're drug dealers trying to move cocaine and whatnot from this place to that place, and he was providing them this sort of safe passage. So again, we already said that he's making all this money, he's providing all these opportunities for these drug dealers. He's literally at the top of his game at this point, and it seems to be working for him. Nothing's going wrong. So in their minds, all these spells are actually working for them.
Yeah, because it's apart from a time when the police had gone to one of his apartments to look for evidence, I guess, when the Calzada family was killed, there wasn't much interference from things that I have read from the police and Constanzo, so he was basically free to kind of do what he wanted to do. At this point, this is showing all the other drug families that he's not someone that you shouldn't mess with, but at the same time, if you need help, you go to him. At this point now, there was another victim which was unnamed. He had killed that victim on the ranch, and because the victim hadn't died in a way that he
Planned or expected.
Yeah, so the victim, I guess, didn't plead for his life, didn't cry, and it was a disappointment to him. So he had told his disciples, go out and find me, well, from what I've read, go out and find an Anglo and bring them back to me as a sacrifice. From what AI told me, he said that...
So they were trying to find somebody who had intelligence. So again, stressing it again, if they wanted youth, they'd find a child. If they wanted strength, they'd find a strong person. And if they wanted brains, they'd find a student. So this is where Mark Kilroy comes into the picture. It's important to tell you the proximity between Texas and Mexico. So students would travel from America to Mexico because the border was quite close. Students from Texas, like Mark Kilroy, would travel from Texas to Mexico, so they could literally park their car on the border and then walk across. Now, the drinking age was less in Mexico. Mexico was a party town, so loads of spring breakers students would travel to Mexico to party. And this is unfortunately where Mark Kilroy lost his life. But we're going to leave it there, and we'll explain the details in the next episode.
Like, comment and subscribe. Let's get this video up to 20 likes and we'll post part 2.
Yeah. Also, we're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. Right now we're at 400. I mean, you could share, you could add a comment, do everything you can to help us. We're not trying to make you out of pocket here. We're just asking you to support what we're trying to do. We're doing research, finding about all these cases. Help us out, seriously.
And just to say to our friends, I'm really disappointed that you couldn't even freaking do the bare minimum, but cool, innit?